The Mongols meet their match, the Battle of Ain Jalut. 13th century Cairo glistened jewel-like on the banks of the Nile. The winter of 1260 had given way to spring, and the first touch of the coming summer heat hung in the air. Most of the city's inhabitants went about their daily business unaware that anything special was happening. A few other gossiped, gesturing towards the Sultan's palace and speculating on the meaning behind the strange envoy that now had the attention of Sultan Saif ul-Din Qutuz and his generals. In the palace, Qutuz shifted uneasily in his chair and beheld the four men before him with a mixture of hatred and justifiable anxiety. The emissaries represented the Mongol prince Hulagu Khan, and they laid before Qutuz a letter. It was not written in the tone by which one head of state normally addressed another. From the King of Kings of the East and West, the Great Khan. To Qutuz the Mamluk, who fled to escape our swords. You should think of what happened to other countries, and submit to us. You have heard how we have conquered a vast empire and have purified the earth of the disorders that tainted it. We have conquered vast areas, massacring all the people. You cannot escape from the terror of our armies. Where can you flee? What road will you use to escape us? Our horses are swift, our arrows sharp, our swords like thunderbolts, our hearts as hard as the mountains, our soldiers as numerous as the sand. Fortresses will not detain us, nor arms stop us. Your prayers to God will not avail against us. We are not moved by tears nor touched by lamentations. Only those who beg our protection will be safe. Hasten your reply before the fire of war is kindled. Resist and you will suffer the most terrible catastrophes. We will shatter your mosques and reveal the weakness of your God, and then we will kill your children and your old men together. At present you are the only enemy against whom we have to march. The Mongol ambassadors and Qutuz considered one another for long moments, then Qutuz withdrew, commanding his Mamluk generals to follow him. The Mongols merely smiled. The impromptu council of war was a somber affair as Qutuz's principal officers recounted the sober facts of the Mongol advance. Qutuz reflected on the situation. A proud, decisive man, he was not used to being addressed in terms of a coldly arrogant ultimatum. But he was also a realist. To his generals he admitted the Mamluks were probably no match for the Mongols. The commanders agreed and recommended capitulating to the Mongol demands. But Qutuz's own opinion differed. The Sultan had come to power by knowing how and when to act. Observing the dissolute and vapid character of the 15-year-old Ayyubid Sultan Nur al-Din Ali ibn Aybak in the face of the Mongol threat, Qutuz had deposed him the previous October. Egypt needs a warrior as its king, he explained. To submit now would be an act of cowardice and treachery. He would not surrender, he defiantly told them. If no one else will come, I will go and fight the Tartars alone. He barked out orders to his guards, who promptly seized the envoys. The Mongols, he knew, considered ambassadors to be untouchable. They treated those sent to them with utmost respect and expected theirs to be treated the same. To harm one they considered an act of unforgivable treachery. Qutuz commanded the ambassadors be cut in half at the waist, then decapitated and their heads placed on Cairo's Great Zuwila Gate. The Mamluks were now bloodily and irrevocably committed to war with the Mongols. In the ensuing months, the events triggered that day by Qutuz would create a maelstrom whose center would come to rest at Ain Jalut, the spring of Goliath, where legend held that the shepherd David slew the Philistine giant Goliath. Enraged Hulagu Khan gathered the horde for war while Qutuz made peace with old enemies and prepared Cairo for the inevitable onslaught. The fate of Islam as a political force was hung by a thread. Then fate intervened. Hulagu Khan fell back to Iran on the news of the death of the great Khan Monj, leaving a portion of the army under the command of a Christian general, Kitbuka, who claimed descent from one of the three wise men who visited the infant Jesus, while he contested for Mongol leadership. Emboldened, Qutuz advanced, making overtures to the Crusader leaders who were being courted into an alliance by the Mongols against the hated Muslims. As they wavered, a papal decree, based largely on the opinions of a clerical spy, arrived in the Holy Land, settling the issue. The battle that followed was epochal, not in the way it was fought, but in the outcome and the ripples it sent through the world and the shaping of its history. The clash of Mongol and Mamluk at Ain Jalut was one of the most significant battles in world history, yet it is a rare Western history class that even hears mention of it, even though it was as important for Western civilization as those fought at Marathon, Salamis, Lepanto, Chalons, and Tours. Had the Mongols succeeded in conquering Egypt, they would have been able to storm across North Africa to the Straits of Gibraltar. Europe would have been clamped in an iron ring all the way from Poland to the Mediterranean. The Mongols would have been able to invade from so many points that it is unlikely that any European army could have been positioned to hold them back. Instead, the Mamluks stopped the westward Mongol advance and smashed the myth of Mongol invincibility. Kutu's superior generalship had shown the vaunted Mongols were just as fallible as any army. The psychological impact worked both ways. The Mongols were shaken. Their belief in themselves was never quite the same, and Ain Jalut marked the end of any concerted campaign by the Mongols in the Levant. Except for a few small contingents sent into Syria to conduct revenge raids, the Mongols never attempted a reconquest of the lands that Sultan Qutuz had wrested from them. The Muslim victory also saved Cairo from the fate of Baghdad, destroyed the last hope of a Christian restoration in the Middle East, doomed the remaining Crusader states, and raised Mamluk Egypt to the status of leading Muslim power and the home of what was left of Arabic culture and learning. The Mongol response. In mid-February, Hulagu's vast army once again began to stir to life as he made preparations for the march on Egypt. The Mamluks, who numbered about 20,000, took steps to defend Egypt against the expected assault. Then fate intervened. A messenger brought word to Hulagu that the great Khan, Monj, had died. In keeping with Mongol tradition, all the princes, including Hulagu, were summoned to Mongolia to attend a Kurultai council to elect his successor. Ironically, the death of the previous Khan had caused the westernmost armies to pull back after conquering the Poles. Qutuz also gained an unexpected ally. During his rise to power, the Sultan had murdered the leader of the Bori Mamluks, Aktay, earning the lasting enmity of the faction and its leader, Baybars. Baybars had withdrawn with a group of supporters to Syria from where he had been launching raids on Egypt. Qutuz and Baybars looked on each other with contempt, loathing, and distrust. Nevertheless, they realized that a Mongol victory would mean their mutual destruction. When Damascus fell, Baybars offered his support, which Qutuz accepted in early March. Meanwhile, Hulagu pulled his main army back to Maraga, leaving Kitbuka in Syria with 2 tumans, or about 15 to 20,000 Mongols. Kitbuka was ordered to press on to Egypt. A raiding party was sent into Palestine, cutting the usual Mongol path of pillage and slaughter through Nablus all the way to Gaza, but on Kitbuka's orders, it did not attack the narrow strip of Crusader-held territory along the coast. The Crusaders, who were too weak to provide any significant resistance against the Mongols on their own, were embroiled in a bitter debate over whether or not to ally themselves with the invaders. Some, like Anno von Sangerhausen, Grand Master of the Teutonic Knights, favored a Christian-Mongol coalition, others were as vehemently opposed. Kitbuka hoped his show of charity would sway the argument in favor of the Mongols. He badly misunderstood them. 2 Crusaders' leaders, John of Beirut and Julian of Sidon, responded with raids on the new Mongol-held territories. Kitbuka sent a punitive expedition against Sidon. On entering the town, the Mongols plundered the town and massacred its citizens. Only the castle of the sea and its garrison held out. Christian order for the Mongol cause cooled considerably. It turned frigid when word reached the Crusaders that another Mongol army under Barundai had invaded Poland. Almost simultaneously, the French King Louis IX's envoy to the Mongols, William of Rubruck, returned from Mongolia with a complete report on the invaders. After reading it, Pope Alexander IV sent word throughout Christendom. The Mongols were pagan, brutal savages who were not to be trusted, he declared. Anyone making an alliance with them would be excommunicated. The matter of a Mongol alliance was settled for the Latin Christians. Qutuz advances. When news reached Qutuz of Hulagu's withdrawal, he realized the military landscape had been completely transformed. He ordered a halt to defensive preparations and commanded his men to prepare to advance against the Mongols. In another audacious move, he sent envoys to the Crusader leaders in Acre asking for safe passage and the right to purchase supplies. For the surprised Franks, the request presented a thorny question. To cooperate with Qutuz would mark the Crusaders as enemies of the Mongols, opening all their territory to the wrath of the hordes, the full strength of which they knew they could not resist. On the other hand, Qutuz was the only hope of ridding the region of the foreign invaders. After a lengthy debate, the Egyptian request was agreed to. On July 26, 1260, the Egyptian army began its advance. Near Gaza, Baibars, in command of the vanguard, encountered and destroyed a small Mongol force on long-range patrol. The war had begun. Kit Buka, from his base at Baalbek in modern Lebanon, assembled his army and began a march to the south, moving down the eastern side of Lake Tiberias. Qutuz led his army north and eventually reached the outskirts of Acre. There, while the nervous Crusader leaders watched his army pitch their tents in the shadow of the city, he planned his next move and purchased supplies. Word soon arrived that the Mongols, and a large contingent of native Syrian conscripts, had circled Lake Tiberias and were approaching the Jordan River, following the same invasion route used by Saladin in 1183. Qutuz ordered the army southeast to meet them. On September 3, Kit Buka turned west across the Jordan and up the rising slope to the plain of Esdraelon. Qutuz established positions at Ain Jalut, the spring of Goliath, where local tradition held that David had slew Goliath. There the vast plain narrowed to just under 5 kilometers wide, protected on the south by the steep slope of Mount Gilboa and by the hills of Galilee on the north. Qutuz placed units of Mamluk cavalry in the surrounding hills, while ordering Baibars and the vanguard forward. The Mamluks approached the coming battle with a desperate sense that there was no alternative to victory. One more significant Mongol victory and Islam, as a political power, was finished. Genghis Khan's policy of remorseless brutality and no mercy might have been effective in paralyzing lesser men. It had stiffened the resolve of the Mamluks and reinforced their determination. Before the advance, Qutuz, in a speech that brought tears to the eyes of his men, reminded them of the nature of Tartar savagery. There was no alternative to fighting, he said, except a horrible death for themselves, their wives and their children. It steeled the souls of the Mamluks for the coming battle against an enemy that had never tasted defeat. The spring of Goliath. Baibars advanced quickly and made contact with Kit Buka's force coming towards Ain Jalut. Seeing Baibars' force, Kit Buka mistook it for the entire Mamluk army and ordered his men to charge, leading the attack himself. The two armies collided and both seemed to stop in the fierce clash that followed. Then Baibars ordered a retreat. The Mongols rode triumphantly in pursuit, victory in their grasp. When they reached the springs, Baibars ordered his army to wheel and face the enemy. Only then did the Mongols realize they had been tricked by one of their own favorite tactics, the feigned retreat. As Baibars re-engaged the Mongols, Qutuz ordered the reserve cavalry out from its hiding places in the foothills and slopes and against the Mongol flanks. Realizing that he was now committed to a battle with the entire Mamluk army, Kit Buka ordered his ranks to charge the Muslim left flank. The Mamluks held, wavered, held again but eventually were turned, cracking under the ferocity of the Mongol assault. As the Mamluk wing threatened to dissolve and it appeared the entire army might be routed, Qutuz rode to the site of the fiercest fighting and threw his helmet to the ground so the entire army could recognize his face. "O Muslims," he shouted 3 times in stentorian tones. His shaken troops rallied and the flank held. As the line solidified, Qutuz led a countercharge sweeping back the Mongol squadrons. Kit Buka was now faced with a deteriorating situation. When one subordinate suggested a withdrawal, his response was brief: "We must die here and that is the end of it. Long life and happiness to the Khan." Despite the relentless Mamluk pressure, Kit Buka continued to rally his men. Then his horse took an arrow and he was thrown to the ground. Captured by nearby Mamluk soldiers, he was taken to the Sultan amidst the sounds of battle. "After overthrowing so many dynasties, you are caught at last, I see," Qutuz exulted. Kit Buka, for his part, was still defiant. "If you kill me now, when Hulagu Khan hears of my death, all the country from Azerbaijan to Egypt will be trampled beneath the hoofs of Mongol horses." In a move calculated to insult his captor, Kit Buka added, "All my life I have been a slave of the Khan. I am not, like you, a murderer of my master." Qutuz ordered Kit Buka executed and his head sent to Cairo as proof of the Muslim victory. With their leader gone, the remaining Mongols fled 12 kilometers to the town of Baisan, where they drew up to face the pursuing Mamluk cavalry. The resulting clash broke the remnants of the Mongol force, and the few that could escape crossed the Euphrates. Within days the victorious Qutuz re-entered Damascus in triumph, and the Egyptians moved on to liberate Aleppo and the other major cities of Syria. Epilogue. For Qutuz, the ecstasy of victory was relatively short-lived. After Aleppo was retaken, Baibars suggested that he be given the emirate of the region as recognition of his contributions. Qutuz refused. Baibars sulked. When the Mamluk army was only a few days from its triumphal return to Cairo, Baybars went to see Qutuz on a matter of state. Reaching out in greeting, he grabbed the Sultan's sword hand and withdrew a dagger from his belt, then drove it into Qutuz's heart. When the army entered Cairo, Baybars rode at their head as Sultan, destined to be the greatest of all Mamluk warriors. But that is another story.